What if you are the last person on Earth to read the words of a vanished world? In the fading light of a dying empire, one man turned a final page inside the ruins of the Library of Alexandria, guarding the last whispers of ancient knowledge before the flames consumed it forever. If mysteries like this keep your curiosity awake, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next story the past tried to erase. The Library of Alexandria has always lingered in the imagination as one of history's greatest mysteries. It was said to hold the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, a place where scholars and philosophers gathered to share wisdom. Today, only fragments remain, leaving behind a lingering sense of wonder and loss. Imagine a place where every scroll of wisdom, from distant kingdoms and forgotten ages, was gathered under one roof. Mathematics, medicine, astronomy, poetry, all waiting to be discovered. What if such a place truly existed, and what if it vanished before its secrets could be shared? No one knows how many scrolls existed there. Ancient estimates range from hundreds of thousands to possibly over 1 million. Numbers fade into legend, yet the image is powerful. Endless shelves bending under the weight of human curiosity. Each scroll a universe of ideas waiting to be discovered. Travelers arriving in Alexandria often contributed their own works. Ships docking at the harbor brought treatises, histories, and poetry, all carefully copied for preservation. It is as if the city demanded tribute, not of gold, but of thought, ideas, and insight, a currency more enduring than silver or spice. Imagine being a scholar within the library. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the faint scratch of a stylus fills the air. The smell of papyrus and ink lingers as philosophers debate quietly, exchanging ideas on mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Every corner hums with the pulse of discovery. The librarians were powerful guardians of knowledge. Their work involved cataloging scrolls, maintaining fragile manuscripts, and deciding which texts should be preserved or likely human in their frustrations. They probably argued, laughed, and occasionally cursed the indecipherable handwriting of foreign scribes. Their diligence shaped the survival of knowledge for centuries. Some accounts describe scrolls tied with colored ribbons, each color marking a subject. Red for history, green for medicine, yellow for poetry. A simple yet elegant system, perhaps imperfect, but effective. One can imagine the sight of endless rows of scrolls, color-coded and ordered, like a rainbow of ancient wisdom stretching across the halls. The library's patrons were diverse. Philosophers debated in shaded courtyards. Mathematicians scribbled calculations in sand. Poets recited verse to attentive listeners. Sailors shared stories from distant lands, and physicians discussed remedies. All were drawn together by the magnetic force of knowledge, each contributing to the invisible web of intellect that bound the city. Imagine the building itself. Marble floors echo with footsteps. Sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating scrolls stacked high on shelves. Courtyards are alive with murmured conversations, while quiet rooms contain the meticulous rustle of papyrus. It is not merely architecture, but an immersive environment, designed to nurture thought and the pursuit of wisdom. And yet, we must ask what became of it. How could the greatest repository of human knowledge vanish? Some blame fires, others wars, some negligence, perhaps a combination. Each theory offers a thread, but none provides a full answer. Its disappearance remains a profound mystery that haunts historians and dreamers alike. Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria is often cited as a turning point. Fire from ships may have spread to nearby buildings, consuming scrolls before they could be saved. Later conflicts, accidental mishaps, and political indifference likely compounded the loss, slowly eroding the library until almost nothing remained. The loss was more than material. It represented the disappearance of ideas, discoveries, and possibilities. One can imagine cures lost, inventions forgotten, histories erased. Humanity awoke to a void, realizing that even monumental knowledge is fragile, vulnerable to accidents, politics, and the passage of time. Some fragments survived. Works of Homer, Plato, and Hippocrates reached later civilizations, carried by copies, but countless unknown authors vanished into the void, their thoughts and contributions lost forever. The imagination struggles to reconstruct what could have been, leaving only echoes of brilliance that we may never fully understand. Perhaps The library contained texts from India, Persia, and China, treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, ideas far ahead of their time, histories of kingdoms now forgotten, epic poetry, philosophical each scroll represented a mind reaching out across centuries, a voice now mostly silent, yet whispering faintly through legend. Some exaggerate its glory. Perhaps many scrolls were duplicates, perhaps mundane. Yet the power lies in possibility. The unknown sparks the imagination. We picture endless shelves of knowledge, even if reality was smaller. The legend of the library remains potent because it exists more vividly in thought than it ever could in fact. Even in absence, the library shaped the future. Later centers of learning, from Pergamon to Baghdad, Florence to Paris, sought to emulate it. Each collection of manuscripts carried a spark of Alexandria, preserving ideas that might otherwise have been lost, ensuring that the dream of universal knowledge continued. The longing for such a place persists. Humanity desires spaces where knowledge can be gathered, preserved, and shared. Alexandria became a symbol of that desire, an emblem of intellectual ambition. Its legend stretches across centuries, reminding us that curiosity is a force more enduring than fire, war, or neglect. Myths amplify the allure. Stories of vast halls, countless scrolls, and brilliant scholars echo through literature and popular imagination. We mourn a library never fully known, perhaps more so than any other lost treasure. Its absence invites speculation, allowing each generation to imagine what wonders it might have held. The dream continues in modern forms. Digital libraries, archives, and databases carry fragments of Alexandria's spirit, yet, even today, information is vulnerable. Servers fail, data disappears. The ghost of the library reminds us that preservation is never complete, that the fragility of knowledge remains a timeless concern. The silence left by the library teaches humility. For all our achievements, knowledge can vanish. The fragile threads that preserve history are easily broken. Ancient manuscripts remind us that human endeavor is temporary, and even the most monumental collections are not immune to decay. Still, imagining its halls brings comfort. Oil lamps glow softly in twilight, scrolls rustle in quiet rooms. Scholars whisper to one another. For a moment, the library's alive again, not as stone and papyrus, but as a living dream, a sanctuary of thought, preserved in imagination, if not in reality. It stands as both caution and inspiration. Knowledge can be lost, yet the desire to preserve it endures. The great library may be gone in form, but its spirit persists wherever curiosity and wonder remain, shaping every library, archive, and quiet scholar who dreams of understanding the world. Alexandria reminds us how fragile ambition can be. Great collections can disappear due to accidents, neglect, or conflict. One stray spark, one mismanaged scroll, centuries of work can vanish. Such reflections humble us and make even modern scholars respect the delicate care needed to preserve knowledge. The librarians themselves were human, not mythical guardians, likely frustrated, laughing, arguing over details, scribbling notes, and correcting errors. Their work, painstaking yet ordinary, shaped the survival of ideas. Without them, even the fragments that remain today might have been lost to time, leaving only whispers and imagination. The scholars traveling to Alexandria experienced a kind of pilgrimage. Journeys across deserts and seas brought them to its doors, drawn by the promise of rare knowledge. In a world without airplanes or trains, the effort itself added value to the insights they gained and preserved. Ordinary citizens were also touched. They may not have entered the grand halls, yet they absorbed the culture of intellect. The library's presence shaped the city's identity, blending commerce and curiosity, trade and thought, creating a community where knowledge mattered as much as wealth or politics. Yet the library was vulnerable. Knowledge is paradoxically powerful and fragile. A fire, an invasion, or simple neglect could erase centuries. This fragility persists, even in our digital age, reminding us that human achievement is never permanent, and every effort to preserve knowledge carries responsibility. Some scrolls were rescued, hidden, or copied elsewhere, Perhaps pieces of Alexandria survive today in monasteries, private collections, or ancient libraries. Each rediscovery hints at the possibility that not all was lost, and that fragments may still whisper to us across centuries, waiting to be found. Gaps in the library are as important as what survived. Missing pieces leave space for imagination and speculation. They allow us to wonder what might have been, and to recognize that history is shaped not only by what is preserved, but also by what is lost, and the stories we tell to fill that void. Memory itself is selective. What endures often reflects the choices of scribes, rulers, and collectors. Alexandria's story is as much about decisions and chance as about fire or war. What survived, what vanished, and what we imagine lost together shape the powerful myth of the library that continues to captivate. Was the library truly as grand as legends suggest? Perhaps, or perhaps it was smaller and ordinary, later magnified by retelling. The power of Alexandria lies not in certainty, but in possibility. Its absence keeps it alive, a boundless canvas for the imagination, offering endless what-ifs for dreamers and scholars alike. Even absent, the library shaped future centers of learning. From Baghdad to Florence, from monasteries to modern archives, the dream of Alexandria lived on. Each collection carried a fragment of its ambition, a reminder that human curiosity is relentless and that knowledge, once discovered, demands preservation across time. The longing for such a place persists today. Humanity yearns for spaces where all wisdom can converge. Alexandria became a symbol of intellectual aspiration, an emblem of curiosity stretching across centuries. Its legend invites imagination, encouraging us to wonder, reflect, and explore what might have been lost among its endless scrolls. The myth only grows with time. Tales of towering shelves, countless scrolls, and brilliant minds echo in literature, films, and classrooms. We mourn a library never fully known. A treasure of thought vanished before its potential was realized. Its absence lets imagination roam free, filling the empty shelves with possibility. In a way, Alexandria lives on digitally. Modern databases, online archives, and global libraries echo its ambition. Yet even now, knowledge is fragile. Hard drives fail, websites vanish, and data can be lost. The spirit of Alexandria whispers, a timeless warning. Preservation is never guaranteed. The silence left by the library teaches humility. Human achievement, no matter how grand, is vulnerable. Even monumental efforts can vanish in moments. Every manuscript reminds us that permanence is illusory, and that knowledge must be nurtured, protected, and cherished if it is to survive. Imagining the halls brings comfort. Oil lamps glow softly, scrolls rustle in quiet rooms, and scholars murmur to one another. In thought, the library is alive again, not as stone and papyrus alone, but as a living dream, a sanctuary of thought preserved in imagination, allowing visitors to wander its aisles centuries later. It stands as both caution and inspiration. Knowledge can vanish, yet the desire to preserve it endures. The great library may be gone physically, but its spirit persists wherever curiosity thrives. In classrooms, libraries, and minds eager to seek, question, and wonder about the world. Alexandria reminds us how fragile human ambition can be. Great collections vanish due to accidents, neglect, or conflict. One stray spark, a mismanaged scroll, or political turmoil could erase centuries of effort. Such reflections humble us, showing that care and diligence are vital to the survival of knowledge. The librarians themselves were ordinary humans. They likely argued, laughed, and occasionally cursed. The indecipherable handwriting of visitors, their mundane frustrations were essential to preserving extraordinary ideas. Without their diligence, the fragments that survived may have been lost forever, leaving only empty imagination in place of wisdom. Scholars traveled great distances to reach Alexandria. Journeys across deserts and seas required courage and stamina. Yet each arrival brought new insights, rare scrolls, and unique perspectives, enhancing the library's collection. In a world without modern travel, such devotion made the library a place of pilgrimage and aspiration. Ordinary citizens were touched indirectly. Though many could not enter, They felt the library's influence through the culture of the city. Alexandria became more than a hub of commerce. It became a hub of ideas. Knowledge permeated daily life, shaping education, debate, and the city's identity itself. Yet the library was fragile. Knowledge is both powerful and delicate. Fires, invasions, or negligence could erase centuries of thought. This fragility continues today in our digital age, reminding us that every effort to preserve knowledge requires vigilance, care, and foresight. Some scrolls were rescued, hidden, or copied. Elsewhere, pieces of Alexandria may survive in monasteries or private collections. Rediscovered fragments hint that not all was lost. Each find offers a whisper from the past, a link to the lost minds and ideas of the ancient world. Gaps are as important as surviving works. Missing texts leave room for imagination and speculation. We wonder what might have been. History is shaped as much by what was forgotten as by what endured. Alexandria's absence is a canvas for reflection, curiosity, and dreaming. Memory is selective. What survives depends on choices by rulers, scribes, and collectors. Alexandria's story is shaped not only by fire or war, but by chance, preservation, and human decision. Its legend is therefore a collaboration between what was and what we imagine, giving it enduring power. Was the library as grand as legends suggest? Perhaps, or perhaps not. Its real size may have been smaller, magnified by storytellers over time. Yet, the power lies in its myth. Absence allows imagination to flourish, offering endless what-ifs for dreamers, scholars, and anyone seeking wonder. Its loss emphasizes the impermanence of knowledge. Even extraordinary human achievements can disappear in moments. Alexandria's story reminds us that preservation is fragile and that curiosity, while enduring, requires diligence to survive through generations. And yet, there is solace in imagining it. Scholars whisper across marble halls. Oil lamps flicker in shadowed corners. Scrolls rustle. Secrets are pondered, and ideas drift like dust motes in sunlight. The library becomes alive again in thought, a timeless space for learning and contemplation. The library is a symbol of humanity's quest for knowledge. It teaches that ambition, curiosity, and preservation are interlinked. What we achieve today may vanish tomorrow, but the effort to learn, record, and preserve remains a vital part of civilization. The longing for Alexandria persists. We dream of a place where knowledge converges, ideas flourish, and wisdom is protected. Its absence inspires us to create our own spaces, libraries, and systems to ensure that learning is safeguarded for future generations. Even Archimedes, these stories hold power. Alexandria's legend inspires architects, scholars, and educators. Its imagined halls remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is timeless, and that imagination itself can preserve ideas as effectively as ink on papyrus. Modern digital archives echo its ambition. Bits replace scrolls, servers replace shelves, yet vulnerability remains. Fire may have become electrical, decay may have become digital corruption, but the principle is the same. Knowledge must be actively preserved, or it risks being lost. The story teaches patience. Scholars copying scrolls, traveling for knowledge, and debating ideas highlight a slow, deliberate process. Progress is often incremental, quiet, almost imperceptible, perfect for reflection, meditation, and the gentle rhythm of ASMR storytelling. It also teaches humility. No matter how great the library, human effort is finite. Time erodes walls, fires consume scrolls, and empire shift. Alexandria reminds us that pride in knowledge must be balanced with care and foresight. And still, hope persists. Rediscovered manuscripts, copied texts, and surviving fragments offer glimpses of brilliance. Perhaps more waits hidden in the sands, monasteries, or forgotten collections. The possibility keeps scholars, dreamers, and curious minds searching even today. The library's influence reaches us indirectly. Mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and literature we study today may owe something to ideas once preserved there. The fragments we possess hint at greater wisdom, leaving us with tantalizing glimpses of what might have been. Ultimately, Alexandria represents both loss and aspiration. Its story reminds us of the fleeting nature of human achievements, yet also the enduring power of curiosity and imagination. In its absence, it still teaches, inspires, and provokes reflection. Close your eyes and imagine it once more. Marble columns, sunlit courtyards, shelves groaning under the weight of scrolls, the faint rustle of papyrus, the whispers of scholars. The great Library of Alexandria is gone, yet it lives on in thought, memory, and imagination waiting for each mind willing to explore. The Library of Alexandria was said to hold the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, a labyrinth of scrolls and manuscripts. Each scroll carried the thoughts of a mind long gone, a snapshot of civilizations across centuries, waiting silently for someone curious enough to discover its secrets. Imagine entering a hall filled with shelves stretching higher than the eye can see. Scrolls bound with colored ribbons hint at their subjects. Red for history, green for medicine, yellow for poetry. The colors create a quiet symphony, a visual rhythm of knowledge waiting to be explored. Among the shelves were texts from Egypt, Greece, India, Babylon, and perhaps even China. Each civilization contributed its discoveries, experiments, and philosophies, bringing together the world's intellectual history under one roof. It was, in a sense, humanity's memory in physical form. Mathematics occupied a prominent place. Scholars could study geometry, algebra, and early arithmetic. They could compare techniques from Babylonian tablets to Greek proofs, or observe how Egyptian calculations influenced later thinkers. The library became a crossroads for numerical thought and problem-solving across centuries. Astronomy also filled countless scrolls. Observations of stars, planets, eclipses, and calendars were recorded with meticulous care. Astrologers, mathematicians, and curious students might pore over diagrams of the heavens, noting the patterns that govern the night sky, imagining ways to predict and understand the cosmos. Medicine and anatomy were extensively documented. Physicians recorded remedies, herbal treatments, surgical procedures, and observations of the human body. Knowledge from Egypt, with its papyri of herbs and treatments, mingled with Greek theories of humors, creating a vast compendium of healing wisdom. Philosophy had a room, or perhaps a hall, devoted entirely to debate and thought. Scrolls contained dialogues of Socrates, Plato, and other thinkers. Treatises questioned the nature of reality, morality, and governance. Visitors could wander through centuries of contemplation, absorbing ideas about existence, virtue, and human behavior. Poetry and literature were abundant. Epic poems, love sonnets, and plays lined the shelves. Ancient storytellers' voices echoed through the delicate papyrus, each line a fragment of cultural memory. One could imagine reading a verse, pausing to savor the cadence and imagery of civilizations long gone. History scrolls documented kingdoms, empires, and dynasties. Tales of conquest, diplomacy, and daily life were preserved, some from first-hand witnesses, others compiled by scholars. Each scroll was a bridge to the past, providing insight into human triumphs, follies, and the complex tapestry of civilization. Geography and exploration filled the minds of many. Maps, descriptions of lands, rivers, and mountains were meticulously drawn. Travelers' accounts provided glimpses into regions otherwise unknown to the Mediterranean world. One could trace the Nile, imagine distant deserts, and wonder what mysteries lay beyond the horizon. Engineering and technology were studied with keen interest. Devices for lifting, measuring, and building were described. Water systems, bridges, and siege equipment filled the scrolls. Scholars debated efficiency in design, sharing ideas across cultures, creating a repository of practical and theoretical knowledge intertwined. The library likely contained musical theory and instruments. Notation, composition, and theory were recorded on scrolls. Students could study ancient melodies, understanding rhythm, harmony, and the relationship between mathematics and sound. Perhaps one could even reconstruct songs that had not been heard for centuries. Legal texts preserve laws, decrees, and governance systems. From Egypt's pharaohs to Greek city-states, scrolls documented rights, responsibilities, and justice. They reflected societal norms and offered a window into how ancient civilizations sought order, fairness, and control over their communities. Religious and theological writings were abundant. Myths, rituals, and moral tales mingled with philosophy. The scrolls contained the beliefs of multiple cultures, sometimes harmonized, sometimes in tension. Visitors could ponder the divine, human understanding of the cosmos and the ways people sought meaning in existence. Botany and zoology were recorded meticulously. Plants, animals, and their behaviors were described, along with medicinal uses and ecological observations. Scholars compared species, documented differences, and theorized about life. The library offered one of the earliest comprehensive attempts to catalog the natural world. Alchemy and early chemistry occupied corners of the collection. Observations of reactions, metals, and substances were written in cryptic notes. Students could experiment, theorize, and sometimes fail spectacularly. These scrolls bridged practical curiosity and mystical thinking, capturing humanity's earliest efforts to understand matter. Cartography and navigation were crucial. Scrolls included star charts, compasses of thought, and coastal maps. Sailors and explorers contributed data from their journeys. Alexandria became a hub for coordinating knowledge about travel, trade, and the seas, essential for a civilization connected by water and commerce. Language studies were important. Scholars documented grammar, vocabulary, and translation techniques. Scrolls might compare Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, and other tongues. Linguists could trace the evolution of words, idioms, and syntax, exploring how communication shaped human thought. Mathematical puzzles, games, and recreational logic were recorded. Scrolls included early chess-like games, riddles, and strategy problems. These may seem trivial, but they trained minds, encouraged lateral thinking, and demonstrated how knowledge could be both serious and playful. Architecture scrolls detailed temples, houses, and monuments. Measurements, aesthetics, and techniques were described. Builders could replicate or innovate designs, sharing insights into structure, beauty, and function, blending utility with artistry. Astronomical devices, sundials, and instruments were illustrated and described. The library didn't only contain text. Diagrams and drawings conveyed understanding. Scholars could learn how to measure time, predict seasons, or calculate eclipses with practical tools accompanying theoretical knowledge. Meteorology observations noted winds, rainfall, and seasonal changes. Farmers, sailors, and scholars benefited. Predictions informed planting, navigation, and commerce. Even in its ancient context, the library connected science with daily life, providing knowledge applicable to survival and prosperity. Anthropology and cultural studies were recorded. Customs, rituals, and social norms of distant peoples were documented. Visitors could imagine festivals, marriages, rites of passage, and daily routines of lands they might never visit, enriching understanding of humanity in its diversity. Mathematical astronomy intertwined with mythology. Stories of gods and celestial events accompanied calculations. The library preserved the poetic and practical side of observation, blending narrative and science, myth and measurement, reflecting the holistic way ancient minds understood their universe. Medicine scrolls may have included anatomy sketches, observations of the human body, treatments for injuries, and surgical techniques offered insight into early science. These texts reflected trial, error, and empirical observation, forming the foundation of later medical understanding. Navigation scrolls contained wind patterns, ocean currents, and celestial guidance. Mariners relied on these writings to cross seas safely. Knowledge was cumulative. Each voyage added to the library's store, ensuring that future travelers could build on prior experience instead of repeating mistakes. Mathematical proofs and geometric theorems were abundant. Scholars debated axioms, tested calculations, and proposed new methods. Alexandria became a crossroads where ancient innovations merged, creating fertile ground for discoveries that might otherwise have been lost to isolation. Philosophical debates filled some rooms. Scholars discussed ethics, existence, and politics. Ideas from Plato and Aristotle mingled with local thinkers, creating a space where logic met speculation. Visitors could watch minds wrestle with questions still relevant today, pondering morality, virtue, and the role of humans in the cosmos. Some scrolls contained astronomical predictions. Eclipses, planetary movements, and seasonal shifts were calculated carefully. These observations guided agriculture, navigation, and ritual timing. One could imagine students hunched over diagrams, comparing calculations, learning to map the heavens with precision and awe. Engineering treatises described water systems, aqueducts, and mechanical devices. Architects and builders studied methods for lifting stones, constructing bridges, and creating durable structures. Each scroll represented centuries of accumulated trial, error, and ingenuity. Music theory filled small sections. Ancient notation, instruments, and theory allowed musicians to compose, perform, and understand the relationship between sound and mathematics. Melodies recorded on papyrus might still resonate in imagination, carrying echoes of a civilization lost to time. Botanical scrolls illustrated plants in delicate detail. Herbs, trees, and flowers were labeled with uses, habitats, and medicinal properties. Scholars could trace remedies, discover unknown flora, and understand ecological relationships, bridging nature and science in a way centuries ahead of modern thought. Zoological records described animals, behaviors, and habitats. Creatures from across the known world were catalogued. Observations may have included migratory patterns, diets, and interactions, offering early insights into biology, ecology, and natural history. Alchemy and early chemistry were explored. Scrolls recorded reactions, substances, and experimental methods. Some notes were practical, others mystical. Curious minds could test hypotheses, blending observation, imagination, and trial in search of understanding matter itself. Navigation manuals were crucial. Coastal features, star guides, and compass light devices helped sailors travel safely. Knowledge accumulated from voyages allowed the library to become a hub for trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Legal texts provided insight into governance, from local decrees to royal edicts. The scrolls detailed justice, social norms, and political theory. Scholars could compare systems, reflect on fairness, and learn from successes and failures of civilizations long gone. Religious and mythological texts documented beliefs, rituals, and spiritual philosophies. The library contained Egyptian, Greek, Babylonian, and possibly other traditions. Visitors could explore the sacred and symbolic, imagining festivals, prayers, and rites that shaped human experience. Art and illustration scrolls were likely abundant. Drawings of buildings, tools, and landscapes complemented textual descriptions. Scholars could visualize ancient life, reconstructing architecture, machinery, or clothing, merging practical knowledge with aesthetic appreciation. Mathematical puzzles and games provided entertainment and mental training. Early logic problems, strategy games, and recreational challenges developed reasoning skills. Playful learning occupied some minds alongside serious research, reflecting a culture valuing curiosity in all forms. Maps, diagrams, and star charts made knowledge visual. Detailed representations of the known world, celestial paths, and geographic wonders allowed students to trace journeys, understand terrain, and study the heavens with clarity. Medicine scrolls contained surgical techniques and anatomical studies. Physicians documented procedures, remedies, and treatments, combining empirical observation with cultural knowledge. Students could learn from past successes and failures, preserving insights that would otherwise vanish. Meteorological observations were recorded meticulously. Winds, rains, and seasonal patterns informed agriculture, navigation, and urban planning. Knowledge of natural rhythms helped societies survive and thrive, demonstrating the library's integration of theory and practical life. Anthropological texts captured customs, rituals, and daily life from across cultures. Visitors could study rites of passage, social norms, and domestic practices, gaining insight into diverse human experiences beyond their immediate world. Philosophical writings often combined ethics with cosmology. Questions of existence, divine order, and human responsibility were explored alongside practical knowledge. Alexandria was a place where abstract thought met daily life, teaching reflection alongside observation. Astronomical instruments were accompanied by diagrams, sundials, astrolabes, and early devices helped scholars measure time, predict celestial events, and navigate. Knowledge of the heavens intertwined with practical survival and philosophical wonder. Architecture scrolls, detailed proportions, construction methods, and aesthetic principles. Builders studied temples, homes, and public works. Each scroll reflected centuries of accumulated observation, experimentation, and refinement. Language and linguistics texts were abundant. Scholars compared scripts, syntax, and phonetics. Understanding foreign tongues enabled translation, trade, diplomacy, and the preservation of ideas across cultures. Commerce records and economic studies documented trade, taxation, and market practices. Knowledge of commerce guided merchants and city planners, blending numerical analysis with practical application. Mathematical derivations and proofs were meticulously recorded. Ancient minds explored geometry, ratios, and algebra, developing frameworks that influenced future civilizations. Visitors could trace intellectual threads across time and space. Cultural studies preserved rituals, festivals, and daily life. Observing practices of distant peoples fostered empathy, understanding, and an awareness of humanity's diversity. Scholars might record traditions before they vanished, creating a mosaic of human experience. Astronomy intertwined with mythology, blending observation with story. Celestial events were interpreted in light of gods and legends, merging scientific inquiry with imagination, revealing how ancient cultures sought meaning in the stars. Medicine, again, intersected with observation. Injuries, illnesses, and treatments were carefully catalogued. Students learned through meticulous notes, preserving the practical and theoretical knowledge of generations. Cartography and navigation scrolls were continuously updated. New discoveries, voyages, and trade routes expanded understanding of the known world. Alexandria became a hub of exploration, mapping knowledge as it spread. Engineering scrolls recorded innovations, failures, and solutions. Students could replicate machines, study water systems, or understand structural principles, building on centuries of accumulated experimentation. Philosophical dialogues explored morality, logic, and politics. Ideas circulated, debated, and refined. The library served as a crucible for thought, shaping not only knowledge but the ways people reasoned and interacted with one another. Literature, poetry, and drama provided cultural depth. Stories of love, heroism, and human folly illuminated minds, reminding scholars that wisdom and creativity coexist. Historical records captured wars, diplomacy, and governance. They preserved the lessons of empires, ensuring that future generations could study victories, mistakes, and the complex flow of human events. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, poetry, engineering, religion, geography, art, and language. The library was a universe of human thought. Each scroll was a window, a fragment of civilization, a whisper of minds that lived millennia ago. Even in fragments, the library reminds us of human curiosity. Knowledge was never static. Scholars collected, debated, copied, and challenged ideas. Every scroll was an invitation to explore, question, and imagine a world bigger than any single city. The lost scrolls leave space for imagination. What cures, inventions, or ideas vanished? What wisdom might have accelerated humanity's understanding of the world? The unknown fuels curiosity, keeping the spirit of Alexandria alive in every mind that wonders. The Library of Alexandria may be gone, but its contents, real and imagined, continue to inspire. Mathematics, science, philosophy, literature, and culture owe fragments of their history to its vanished shelves. The dream of knowledge preserved remains timeless. The Library of Alexandria did not vanish in a single fiery night, despite what popular stories suggest. Its disappearance was a slow unraveling. Over centuries, Accidents, politics, and neglect chipped away at what might have been the world's greatest storehouse of ancient knowledge. One story points to Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, during a civil war, Caesar found himself trapped in Alexandria's harbor. To gain advantage, he ordered the ships around him burned. The fire spread uncontrollably, and some say it reached the warehouses that stored scrolls for the library. But the tale of Caesar's fire is not the whole story. Ancient writers disagree about how much damage was actually done. Some believed only part of the collection was lost that day, while others suggested the blaze devoured much of Alexandria's stored scrolls, leaving the city reeling. Fires were not unusual in the ancient world. Cities were packed with wood, papyrus, and oil lamps. A spark could become an inferno in moments. For a place like the library, filled with flammable scrolls, the threat was constant. It was less a matter of if than when. Another chapter in the story points to the Roman Emperor in the 3rd century CE. During fighting to reclaim Alexandria, large parts of the city were destroyed. The area where the library may have stood suffered in the chaos. If scrolls still remained, many likely perished. Then, later, in the 4th century, Emperor Theophilus ordered pagan temples in Alexandria torn down. Among them was the Serapeum, a grand structure that may have housed parts of the library's collection. If scrolls were stored there, they were likely lost forever, destroyed in the tide of religious zeal. By the 7th century, another story emerged. Some medieval writers claimed the Muslim conquest of Egypt under Caliph Omar led to the final destruction. According to the tale, scrolls were used as fuel to heat bathhouses for months. Yet historians argue this story appeared centuries later, casting doubt. The truth, then, may be less dramatic than legend suggests. Instead of one grand catastrophe, the library's decline could have been a slow erosion fire here. Looting there, neglect everywhere. Like a sandcastle washed away by waves, it simply faded, leaving only traces in memory. Scrolls, after all, are fragile. Papyrus deteriorates in damp climates. Without constant care, even carefully stored works crumble. The passage of centuries would have ensured that some knowledge, once brilliant, turned to dust before anyone had the chance to copy it into safer forms. The political climate didn't help. Alexandria was a city often at the center of conflict, caught between empires and ambitions. Scholars could copy only so much while armies marched and rulers shifted. Knowledge was rarely the priority in a city under siege. If you imagine scholars fleeing with scrolls tucked under their arms, you're not far off. Some knowledge may have survived, carried away piecemeal to safer libraries. Bits of Alexandria's wisdom might echo in other collections, fragments hidden in manuscripts that quietly endured elsewhere. The real mystery is how much was lost. Was it thousands of works? Tens of thousands? Ancient writers gave wildly different estimates. Some boasted of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, while others suggested more modest numbers. Without records, the truth rests in speculation, inviting endless debate. Legends exaggerate. As legends do, it is more romantic to picture a single great blaze than to accept centuries of neglect. A dramatic fire makes for a better story, but the slow grind of history is usually more accurate and, unfortunately, far less cinematic. Still, a catastrophic ending appeals to the imagination. To envision scholars running, flames at their backs, clutching armfuls of papyrus, feels more tragic than picturing scrolls quietly rotting in storage. History rarely gives us the drama we crave, though storytellers will always try to fill the gaps. We also must remember the human factor. Scrolls were not only lost to fire and conquest, but also to misplacement, theft, and simple disinterest. Not every scholar was careful. Some works may have been copied poorly, misplaced, or left forgotten in corners until they crumbled beyond repair. The Serapeum episode illustrates this. Even if the main library had suffered earlier, annexes and smaller collections may have survived. When zealotry struck, books were viewed not as treasures, but as symbols of unwanted traditions. Scrolls turned into fuel for destruction, victims of belief rather than accident. In a city so cosmopolitan, books came and went constantly. Ships docking in Alexandria often had scrolls seized and copied. Not every work may have stayed forever. Some may have been returned, others copied elsewhere. scattering Alexandria's influence far beyond its walls, even before disaster struck. It is even possible that many lost works weren't really unique. Knowledge circulated in multiple copies across regions. Alexandria may have been grand, but it was not the only library. Pergamon, Antioch, and other centers preserved their own collections, ensuring that not all wisdom vanished. The sadness comes in thinking of works we never knew existed. The missing plays of Sophocles, treatises on medicine, lost histories of entire cultures all might have once sat quietly in Alexandria, waiting. They may never be recovered, their memory preserved only as haunting what-ifs. Some scrolls may have been lost gradually during renovations or moves. A misplaced bundle, a leaky roof, a careless apprentice saw. Plausible causes. Sometimes destruction isn't grand, but mundane, and mundane losses are rarely recorded in history, even though they quietly erase as effectively as fire. It's worth considering how difficult preservation was. Papyrus is vulnerable to moisture, insects, and time. Unless carefully managed, scrolls rot quickly. Alexandria's humid climate ensured that without constant vigilance, deterioration was inevitable. The library may have lost works simply by the slow march of nature. Economics also played a role. Maintaining a massive collection requires resources, scribes, caretakers, storage, repairs. In unstable times, rulers may have diverted funds to armies or palaces, leaving the library neglected. What good are scrolls when soldiers demand payment and walls need fortifying? In truth, the Library of Alexandria may never have been one building at all. Some argue it was spread across multiple structures, annexes, and warehouses. If so, destruction would have been piecemeal, different parts falling victim to different fates across centuries. Religious shifts contributed to, as pagan traditions faded and new faiths rose, priorities changed. Works deemed heretical or irrelevant may have been deliberately discarded. The survival of knowledge often depended less on wisdom than on whether it aligned with prevailing beliefs. The myth of the grand burning persists, though it captures something in the fragility of knowledge, the fear of losing wisdom. Whether it was fire, neglect, or zealotry, the image of humanity's brightest library going up in smoke haunts the imagination. Yet, we should not imagine Alexandria as unique in its losses. Countless libraries have burned, been looted, or faded. The difference is that Alexandria stood as a symbol of human ambition. Its destruction a reminder of how fragile collective memory can be. What was lost may be impossible to measure. Perhaps some of it lives on in fragments, in citations by later authors, or in manuscripts tucked into monasteries. But the totality is the grand vision of all knowledge gathered in one place. That vision is what truly disappeared. Today, historians debate endlessly. Did Caesar's fire destroy it? Did Aurelian's siege? Was it Theophilus? Or Omar? Or did the library simply dwindle over time? The lack of certainty ensures the story lingers, inviting each generation to tell it anew, often shaped by their own fears and hopes. As romantic as a single blaze may sound, the likely truth is that the library died, not with a bang, but with a whimper. One lost scroll at a time, its shelves thinned, until one day there was no great collection left to mourn. And yet, in a strange way, its disappearance gave it immortality. A library that survived would be simply another archive. A library that vanished became legend. Its absence created a mystery greater than any presence could have sustained. By the medieval period, the library was already spoken of in the past tense. Writers described it as something long gone, a shadow of greatness. Its disappearance had become a story, retold with different villains, depending on who was doing the telling. History had slipped quietly into myth. Even the city itself changed. Alexandria, once a beacon of trade and scholarship, became just another bustling port. Scholars still visited, but the aura of unmatched learning faded. The library's legacy was more remembered than experienced, a ghost haunting the streets that had once carried scrolls and scholars alike. Archaeology offers little certainty. No clear remains of the library have been found. Excavations have unearthed parts of ancient Alexandria, but the shelves of scrolls leave no trace. A pile of ash, a collapsed wall, or a forgotten storeroom might once have held history's greatest secrets. The legend of Omar's bathhouse fires persisted for centuries, despite being dubious. Imagine heating water with the musings of Aristotle or Hippocrates. It's absurd, but memorable. The story survived, not because it was true, but because it made for a dramatic image of ignorance, triumphing over wisdom. Some argue that the library's reputation grew larger in death than it ever was in life. Perhaps it was never quite as vast as claimed. Ancient authors loved exaggeration. Saying hundreds of thousands of scrolls sounds better than admitting a very big but not infinite pile. Still, even if the numbers were inflated, its loss remains tragic. Imagine losing even a few dozen unique works, histories of vanished kingdoms, plays no longer performed, discoveries never repeated. Quantity matters less than the idea that voices were silenced forever, their words erased by time and chance. The slow nature of the loss makes it almost relatable. Who hasn't misplaced something important, only to realize too late it's gone? The difference is that instead of a lost set of keys, it was centuries of accumulated human thought, not exactly something you can replace. There is also the problem of politics. Rulers cared more about power than scrolls. Wars were fought over thrones, not libraries. The destruction of knowledge was rarely deliberate. Illicit was simply collateral damage. Fire does not discriminate between papyrus and kindling. Both burn equally well. One wonders how scholars felt, watching the library diminish. Did they realize history slipping through their fingers? Or did they assume the scrolls would last forever? Humans often fail to notice loss until it is too late. Even the brightest minds could be guilty of complacency. Travelers centuries later still spoke of Alexandria's intellectual past, but the reality no longer matched the reputation. The city lived off memory, boasting of glories gone. Like a retired athlete telling tales of their youth, Alexandria kept alive the myth of brilliance. Long after the games had ended, it's important to remember that not all was lost. Some works survived in other collections. Greek tragedies, Roman histories, and Egyptian knowledge filtered into Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Alexandria may have been diminished, but its influence echoed in libraries that endured elsewhere. Still, the mystery remains the library's greatest legacy. No one knows exactly what disappeared. Was it medical cures? Lost epics, maps of lands unknown, or simply multiple copies of texts we already have today? The absence leaves space for imagination, and imagination keeps the library alive. Theories continue to multiply. Each generation invents its own explanation. Some blame conquest, others blame neglect, and still others whisper about hidden caches of scrolls waiting to be discovered. Hope clings stubbornly, even when evidence refuses to cooperate. After all, lost treasure stories never go out of fashion. Perhaps, in truth, there was no single villain. The library's death was death by 1,000 cuts: war, fire, neglect, politics, religion, economics, and plain old entropy. Like so many human achievements, it simply couldn't withstand everything the world threw at it. This slow loss teaches a lesson about preservation. Knowledge is fragile. Without care, it slips away. We see it today, when digital files vanish, when books decay, when oral traditions die with elders. Alexandria is not just an ancient story. It's a warning about memory itself. Yet we cling to the dream of rediscovery. Each time archaeologists dig in Alexandria, ope surfaces. Maybe one forgotten storeroom remains. Maybe jars of papyrus still hide under sand and stone. The fantasy is irresistible, even if reality stubbornly withholds the prize. Even if no scrolls survive, Alexandria remains symbolic. It represents humanity's hunger to gather, preserve, and share wisdom. That dream has not died. Modern libraries, digital archives, and universities all carry the same torch, even if their shelves glow with screens instead of papyrus rolls. There is irony here. We know more about the story of its loss than the content it held. The destruction itself became the tale. People may not remember the scholars who worked there, but they remember the image of a great library reduced to ash and whispers. And so, the myth persists. Each retelling reshapes it, polishing the story like a river stone. Caesar's flames, Aurelian's battles, Theophilus's zeal, Omar's bathhouses, whether true or not, They form a mosaic of blame that keeps the disappearance forever alive in human imagination. The true ending of the library may be dull, not fire and fury, but mold, rot, and termites, the slow erosion of shelves no one cared to check. It may not make a grand story, but in a way, it's more tragic a reminder of how neglect destroys more than violence. Still, humans love a dramatic finale. That's why the myth of the fire survives. We'd rather imagine a single night of catastrophe than centuries of careless loss. It's easier to mourn a blaze than to admit we simply let knowledge wither from inattention. But the slow fading carries its own poetry. The library did not collapse in one night, but in countless forgotten moments. A dropped scroll, a miscopied line, a cracked roof, letting in the rain. The greatest losses in life often happen this way quietly, almost unnoticed. By the time anyone realized, it was too late. What remained was not a library, but the memory of one. And memories, while powerful, cannot be read, copied, or preserved. They are fragile, flickering, and eventually vanish too, unless written down. In that sense, the Library of Alexandria survives today not in scrolls, but in story. It exists in whispers, in speculation, in longing. Its shelves may be empty, but the idea of them remains full, endlessly refilled by human imagination. Modern minds sometimes dream of rebuilding it. Digital projects aim to collect all human knowledge online, claiming to be heirs of Alexandria. Yet even the internet feels fragile, its archives vulnerable to time, neglect, and human folly. Perhaps we never learned the lesson entirely. The loss of Alexandria teaches humility. Knowledge is not guaranteed. It must be tended, preserved, and passed forward. The silence of its vanished scrolls is a reminder of what neglect costs and a quiet urging not to repeat the same mistakes. So we tell the story again and again, sometimes with fire, sometimes with zealots, sometimes with soldiers or careless rulers. Each version keeps the memory alive. The library may have disappeared, but its legend has become indestructible, etched into the imagination of the world. And that, perhaps, is the library's final trick. In losing its words, it gained immortality. Had it survived, it might be forgotten, an archive among archives. By vanishing, it became eternal, library of absence, that never stops whispering across centuries. Even now, as we speak of its disappearance, we add another layer to its myth. The Library of Alexandria is still alive in conversation, in wonder, in speculation. Its loss became its survival. Its silence became its voice. That paradox is why the story endures. So the library's disappearance was not one moment, but many. Not one fire, but countless flames. Not one conqueror, but centuries of chance and choice. In losing it, we found something else, a symbol of fragility, a reminder of responsibility, and perhaps the most haunting mystery of all. The scholars of the Library of Alexandria were not like the hurried students you might find cramming for an exam today. They lived in a world where knowledge was gathered slowly, scroll by scroll, copied beyond and discussed at length. Their lives revolved around words, silence, and study. They came from different lands, drawn to the city as if it were a great beacon of learning. Some arrived by ship, others by dusty roads, carrying with them the languages and ideas of their homes. In the library, those voices blended together into a slow chorus of curiosity. One of the most well-known scholars was Eratosthenes, a man who managed to measure the earth without ever leaving Egypt. Using shadows, sticks, and mathematics, he imagined the shape of the planet itself. He was not in a rush, he simply let the numbers speak for themselves. Another scholar, Callimachus, created the Pinax, which was essentially the world's first library catalog. Imagine the patience it took to sort through hundreds of thousands of scrolls, deciding where each one belonged. It was less like a glamorous adventure and more like a very long, very quiet paperwork session. Scholars in the library were supported by the Ptolemies, who understood the prestige that came with gathering knowledge. They were given stipends, food, and lodging. In return, they read, wrote, and translated. For many, it was less about fame and more about simply living among books and ideas. It was a life of routine, morning light through stone windows, papyrus unrolled carefully, and ink drying slowly on red pens. Scholars copied texts, not because they were asked to, but because they feared the knowledge might otherwise vanish. A single mistake could erase entire ideas from memory. The library was not silent in the modern sense. It was filled with the sounds of footsteps on stone, the crackle of papyrus, and the low hum of discussion. Debates were slow, not heated men comparing notes, weighing meanings, and pausing for long stretches before answering a question. Languages met in the halls: Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Latin, Sanskrit, and others. Translators worked carefully, knowing that a single misinterpreted word could shift the meaning of a story, a recipe, or a scientific formula. Translation was less an act of speed and more a meditation on meaning. Medicine was another focus. Some scholars studied the works of Hippocrates or Galen, copying remedies and cataloging herbs. One can imagine them bent over scrolls, comparing notes on plants that grew in Egypt with those described in distant lands. Healing was written in papyrus long before it was practiced in streets. Mathematics filled other tables. Geometry, astronomy, and theories of numbers were rolled and unrolled. Scholars drew lines in sand or on wooden boards, erasing them when mistakes were found. There was no rush, only steady progress. Small insights gathered patiently like grains of wheat collected after harvest. Philosophers debated the nature of the soul, the meaning of justice, or the structure of reality. They weren't shouting, they were reclining, pondering, and occasionally raising a brow. The atmosphere encouraged not conclusions, but continued questions, drifting conversations that stretched through afternoons and evenings. Poets, too, found their place. Words were copied with care, verses repeated aloud in low tones, not to entertain a crowd but to preserve rhythm and structure. For a poet-scholar, the library was less a workplace and more a sanctuary where words could rest and endure. The daily schedule was not glamorous. It began with meals of bread, olives, and wine, followed by hours of reading or writing. Scholars would sit for long stretches, adjusting lamps as daylight shifted. Evenings ended not with applause, but with more notes, drafts, and quiet conversation. Meals were part of the rhythm, and discussions often continued over food. A scholar might debate the meaning of a single line of Homer while chewing figs, or describe a medicinal herb while sipping watered wine. Knowledge seeped into every corner of their daily lives. There were teachers among them, passing lessons to young students who wandered the halls. Learning was never confined to one generation. Wisdom was treated like a torch, passed from hand to hand, with care that it not be extinguished. The students, in turn, copied and debated just as their mentors did. The scholars were not all in agreement. Some argued fiercely well, as fiercely as men in flowing robes could argue about the correct interpretation of a scroll. But disagreements were contained within words. No fists, only furrowed brows and long silences until one side eventually conceded. Animals sometimes wandered the grounds, bringing distraction. A stray cat could find itself stretched across a table of scrolls, forcing a scholar to pause his work. It is easy to imagine that even in the pursuit of wisdom, the mundane presence of a purring cat could slow the pace. The scholars also corresponded with rulers and philosophers abroad. Letters arrived on papyrus rolls, unsealed carefully, read slowly, and answered in the same manner. Weeks or months might pass before a reply was sent. Knowledge traveled at the pace of ships, winds, and human patience. When ships arrived at Alexandria's harbor, scrolls were sometimes taken, copied, and stored. Sailors may not have appreciated the delay, but the scholars did. For them, each scroll represented a new doorway, another puzzle, or a missing piece of a larger story they were patiently piecing together. Life in the library was not entirely without hierarchy. Senior scholars held more respect, while younger ones were given the more tedious tasks of copying or sorting. Still, even the tedious had value. Every hand that copied a line ensured that line might survive centuries longer. The atmosphere must have been heavy with ink, wax, and oil from the lamps. Dust from papyrus filled the air, and fingers grew smudged from long hours of writing. To us it might seem uncomfortable, but to them, it was simply the texture of their world. The library also hosted lectures. A scholar might stand and read from a scroll, voice steady, the words drifting across the hall. The audience listened, nodded, and sometimes interrupted with questions. These lectures were not dramatic performances, but slow exchanges, the kind that left minds turning long after the words ended. Some scholars lived nearby, in quarters offered by the rulers. Their homes were simple, filled with scrolls and writing tools. It was less about luxury and more about being close to the center of learning. For them, the city outside was a distraction. The library was the true home. The sea breeze from the harbor sometimes reached the halls, carrying the scent of salt and ships. For scholars who rarely traveled, this was their link to the outside world, a reminder that beyond their scrolls stretched a vast earth they only knew through words and numbers. Seasonal festivals offered breaks from study, though even then, many scholars likely carried their debates into the streets. Imagine a festival filled not only with music and food, but also with quiet men debating geometry beside the fish stalls. Knowledge was never set aside for long. The role of scholars was not purely academic. Some advised rulers on matters of governance, economics, or strategy. Their scrolls contained more than abstract theories. They held real instructions for irrigation, trade, and building. A patient scholar could shape the policies of a kingdom without ever leaving his desk. Women in the library are less recorded, but some scholars believe there were female students and scribes. Their contributions may have been overlooked by the record keepers, yet their presence would not be impossible. After all, knowledge has always been gathered by more than just one group of hands. Every evening, lamps were lit, turning the halls golden. Shadows lengthened, scrolls were stacked, and discussions wound down. The scholars left their benches slowly, as if reluctant to leave the company of words. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, and that repetition was not a burden, but a comfort. It is tempting to imagine the scholars as extraordinary figures, but in truth, they were ordinary men and women in extraordinary circumstances. They read, they wrote, they ate, and they grew tired. What made them remarkable was not what they did, but where they did it and what was lost afterward. Some scholars devoted their time to astronomy, charting the movements of the stars. Night after night, they compared notes, measuring the heavens with simple tools and great patience. The sky above Alexandria became another library, each constellation a scroll waiting to be read with careful, steady eyes. They debated whether the Earth was at the center of the universe or whether it moved around the sun. The discussions were cautious, sometimes speculative, but never rushed. A scholar might spend years refining an argument, not because he lacked certainty, but because time was always on his side. The work of copying texts was endless. Papyrus wore down under the pressure of ink, and mistakes crept in when eyes grew tired. Still, they persisted. Each line copied was a small victory against forgetfulness, a quiet act of resistance against the erosion of memory through time. The scholars often worked in pairs, reading aloud to one another to check accuracy. One voice would drone steadily, while the other scratched letters across papyrus. Errors were caught, corrected, and repeated. It was not an efficient process, but it was the only way to preserve the fragile words. Mathematical problems filled margins, scratched notes left by those who couldn't resist exploring a stray idea. A theorem might begin as a side note, but grow into its own scroll. Knowledge, like weeds in a garden, sprouted where it wished, often in unexpected corners of the library. Some were specialists in history, compiling long narratives of kings and battles. They did not always agree on dates or names, but their chronicles attempted to bring order to the chaos of memory. These scrolls, too, would later vanish, leaving us with gaps where their stories once stood. The scholars had different temperaments. Some were meticulous, checking every line with obsessive care. Others were dreamers, wandering into speculation more than fact. Together, they balanced one another, forming a community where precision met imagination. The library thrived not because of uniformity, but because of these contrasts. Music theory also had its place. Scholars tested harmonies, studied instruments, and debated the mathematics of sound. Perhaps the library halls occasionally carried the notes of a lyre, played softly by a restless thinker. Even in that pursuit of order, beauty found its way into their work. Religious texts arrived from distant lands, some are familiar, others entirely foreign. Translators struggled not only with words, but with ideas that challenged their own beliefs. The library was not a temple to one god or creed. It was a crossroads where all faiths were quietly placed side by side. The scholars also had to maintain the collection. Papyrus, cracked, faded, and wore down. Repairs were made carefully, gluing fragments together, rewriting faded ink, and protecting scrolls with cases. It was a slow fight against decay, one they knew they could never win, yet they carried on anyway. The younger students were often given these more tedious tasks. They learned patience through repetition, handling fragile papyrus until their fingers grew practiced. Mistakes were common, but each correction was a lesson, a reminder that knowledge could slip away with even the smallest act of carelessness. Philosophical schools formed within the library. Stoics, skeptics, and others gathered in corners to quietly defend their views. The debates were never about winning quickly, but about holding a thought in the air, turning it over like a stone, and examining it from every possible angle. Travelers sometimes visited, curious about the scholars and their routines. They expected drama, discoveries, or spectacles, but often left puzzled. What they saw was a room full of men sitting quietly, reading scrolls, occasionally scratching notes. It was not exciting, but it was the steady heartbeat of knowledge. Even meals had a scholarly air. At dinner, discussions continued without pause. A man might chew bread while arguing about geometry, or sip wine while pondering whether the soul was immortal. For them, conversation was as essential as food, and the two were rarely separated. Seasons shaped their routines. In summer, the heat pressed in, ink drying too fast, scrolls growing brittle. In winter, lamps burned longer, smoke curling against ceilings. Yet, the work never ceased. The scholars adapted, slowed, adjusted their pace, and carried on as though the world outside barely mattered. The harbor brought constant reminders of distant lands. Ships carried goods, people, and ideas. Each vessel might bring a scroll with strange symbols, unfamiliar measurements, or forgotten myths. The scholars approached these not with haste, but with deliberate curiosity, unraveling them piece by piece over many months. Friendships formed among them, bonds shaped by long hours of shared silence and thought. A gesture, a nod, or a patient smile could say more than a lengthy speech. These friendships were not loud but enduring, built on the slow rhythm of shared work and quiet discovery. The rulers occasionally visited, expecting to see progress. Scholars would bow, explain their projects, and display their writings. The rulers, polite but impatient, may not have understood the pace of scholarship. After all, wisdom does not fit neatly into schedules, and the scholars were in no hurry to impress. There was humor too, subtle and dry. A tired scholar might joke about ink stains as marks of wisdom, or complain that cats showed more interest in scrolls than some of the younger students. These jokes were not loud, but small smiles softened the long days of work. As night fell, lamps cast shadows across the shelves. The library transformed into a dreamlike place, glowing softly, filled with voices reciting quietly into the evening. The scholars closed their scrolls slowly, as though reluctant to put an end to thoughts that might carry into dreams. Some scrolls were lost, even then damaged, misplaced, or ruined by fire. Each loss was mourned, but the scholars carried on. Their work was never about preserving everything, but about saving as much as possible, one fragile line at a time, against the endless erosion of years. The scholars must have felt both pride and anxiety. Pride in knowing they were part of something greater than themselves. Anxiety in realizing how fragile it all was. The collection was vast, but not indestructible. Even then, they must have sensed how easily it could all vanish. They studied myths as carefully as mathematics. Legends were preserved alongside laws, poetry beside science. To them, all knowledge had value, whether it explained the stars or entertained the imagination. In that balance, the library became a reflection of human thought in its fullest form. Students carried knowledge beyond Alexandria, spreading ideas throughout the Mediterranean. What was read in those halls found its way into other cities, shaping new generations. The scholars may not have seen themselves as influential, but their quiet labor sent ripples far beyond their own lifetimes. The atmosphere encouraged patience. No discovery was too small, no question too trivial. A single word compared, a single line corrected, was treated as worthy of attention. In such a place, time itself seemed slower, stretched into hours of quiet focus and steady progress. Looking back, it is easy to imagine the scholars as grand figures in flowing robes, But in reality, they were men and women at tables, surrounded by scrolls, ink, and oil lamps. What made them remarkable was not their appearance, but their persistence in pursuing knowledge. The scholars lived ordinary lives wrapped around extraordinary tasks. They walked streets, bought bread, shared meals, and endured frustrations like anyone else. Yet each day, they returned to the library, contributing to a grand effort to preserve and expand human thought, one scroll at a time. In the end, the scholars of the Library of Alexandria embodied the quiet, steady rhythm of learning. They were not conquerors, rulers, or warriors. They were keepers of words, custodians of memory, and guardians of imagination. Their legacy endures not in their names, but in the questions they kept alive. The morning sun rose over Alexandria, painting the city in warm hues of gold and orange. Citizens stirred, shutters opened, and the first sounds of activity filled the streets. The air smelled faintly of the sea, with hints of bread baking in clay ovens close to the marketplace. Vendors carried baskets to the market square, arranging olives, figs, and herbs with care. Fishmongers displayed their catch, scales glittering under the light. Customers began to arrive slowly, haggling, laughing, and gossiping. The square buzzed with life, each voice weaving into the fabric of Alexandria's daily rhythm. Near the harbor, sailors unloaded goods brought from distant lands. Crates of spices, ivory, and papyrus were hauled by strong arms. The docks smelled of salt, tar, and sweat. Shouts of directions and greetings filled the air, adding to the chorus of the awakening city. Children scampered across the streets, weaving around carts and animals. They played with sticks, pebbles, or whatever their imaginations could transform into toys. Their laughter echoed against stone walls, sometimes scolded by mothers worried about dirty tunics or careless falls on the rough cobblestones. Goats bleated impatiently as they were herded past. Donkeys pulled carts, laden with grain, their hooves clattering against the streets. Animals mingled naturally with people in the flow of the city. A chicken flapped suddenly from a basket, causing brief chaos and plenty of laughter from amused onlookers. Philosophers gathered in shaded colonnades, already deep in discussion before the heat rose. They gestured dramatically, voices rising and falling in rhythm. To passers-by, it seemed like a performance. Though most kept walking, muttering that philosophers argued about questions no one had asked in the first place. Water sellers strolled through the crowd, clinking bronze cups to draw attention. Thirsty customers paid for a ladle of cool water, grateful for the refreshment. Some joked that water sellers collected more secrets than scholars after all. Everyone stopped to speak with them at least once. During the day, artisans worked steadily in their small workshops. A potter's wheel spun, shaping clay into vessels. The scent of leather and dye drifted from a cobbler's stall. Sparks flew as a blacksmith hammered iron, each strike ringing like a drumbeat, announcing that labor was as constant as the rising sun. Scribes settled at their tables, pens scratching against papyrus. Their posture grew rigid as hours passed, yet their focus remained sharp. Copies of texts emerged steadily, one stroke of ink at a time. Their work was not glamorous, but it ensured that knowledge survived another generation. Near the baths, steam rose gently into the morning air. Citizens prepared for their visits later in the day, bringing small offerings of oil and towels. The baths were not just for washing, but for meeting friends, exchanging news, and engaging in endless debates on politics and poetry. Street performers began to appear as the crowds thickened. A juggler tossed clay cups into the air, catching them to scattered applause. Children clapped eagerly. A man with a lyre sang of old myths, though his voice cracked in places. People smiled, nonetheless, enjoying the effort more than perfection. Fishmongers shouted louder as the sun climbed higher, competing for attention. The smell of salt and fish lingered, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread. Buyers haggled, sometimes dramatically, sometimes playfully, as if arguing was as much a part of the purchase as the fish itself. A sandal repairman sat hunched by his small stall, hammer tapping against leather soles. His rhythm was steady, almost musical, echoing faintly against the nearby stone walls. Some paused to watch him work, impressed by the patience required to keep the city on its feet. Nearby, women examined fabrics dyed in vivid colors, They compared shades, holding cloth to the light, debating loudly over which would fade least in washing. One woman joked that her last tunic had betrayed her by turning bright pink after one wash, drawing laughter from her companions. The marketplace was full of scent herbs, crushed underfoot, roasted nuts, sold from small stalls, honey cakes dripping with sweetness. The mingling aromas created a haze of temptation. Even the sternest scholars passing through might stop for a small taste before retreating back into their scrolls. The library itself towered nearby, its walls gleaming white in the sunlight. Most Alexandrians passed without entering, yet all felt its presence. It was less a building than a guardian, holding more secrets than anyone could guess. For the common citizen, it remained a landmark rather than an accessible treasure. Children sometimes stared at the library's doors, wide-eyed, as if they expected them to swing open and reveal worlds inside. Parents chuckled, telling them it was a place for serious men with long beards and tired eyes, not for chasing games or climbing walls. The city's rhythm was noisy, yet purposeful. The clang of tools, the cry of animals, the murmur of trade all combined into a symphony. Some might call it chaotic, but for Alexandrians, it was the familiar hum of life, one that wrapped around them like a constant companion. As midday approached, the baths grew livelier. Citizens slipped into the cool water or lounged in warm pools. Conversation buzzed as freely as steam rose from the surface. Business deals were struck here, just as often as in markets, proving that wisdom sometimes came with wrinkled fingers. Musicians drifted into the streets, playing flutes and small drums. Their tunes wove through the air, mingling with laughter and shouts. Not every note was perfect, but the melodies carried a spirit of joy that polished stone walls and softened even the sternest expressions. In narrow alleys, craftsmen carried on less noticed. Weavers tightened threads across looms, their hands moving with precision. Carpenters shaped wood into stools, shutters, and chests. Their work provided the unseen backbone of Alexandria, ensuring homes stood, doors closed, and life moved forward with sturdy familiarity. The harbor remained restless, even at midday. Sailors tightened ropes, unloaded cargo, and shouted across ships. Seagulls circled, diving occasionally for scraps. The crash of waves against stone mixed with the creak of wood. For many, the sea was both promise and danger, carrying wealth and storms alike. Food vendors thrived near the docks. Skewers of roasted meat sizzled, seasoned with garlic and herbs. Customers lined up, eager for a quick meal. Fishermen chewed bread, sailors drank watered wine, and everyone left with the scent of smoke lingering on their tunics. Donkey carts rattled past, carrying amphorae of wine or sacks of grain. Their drivers shouted warnings, but pedestrians rarely moved quickly. Instead, they stepped aside lazily at the last moment, grumbling with the kind of irritation reserved for things that happened every single day. Public squares offered shade under tall columns. Here, men gathered to play dice or carve small boards for games. The clatter of dice against stone echoed as laughter followed. Games, it seemed, were just another way to pass wisdom, sometimes luck. Taught lessons faster than philosophy. Young men carried water jars home for their households, balancing them carefully. Occasionally, one stumbled, spilling some. His friends would laugh, and he'd swear under his breath about the weight of clay jars and the injustice of gravity, which seemed always to favor the jar, never the carrier. Cats prowled the streets, slinking between stalls. They hunted rats, lounged in the sun, or accepted scraps with royal indifference. Some Alexandrians joked that the cats knew more about survival than any philosopher, which was probably true, though the cats refused to comment. Evening approached slowly, painting the sky with softer light. The city did not quiet, but shifted. The marketplace thinned, children returned home, and lamps began to flicker to life. Smoke rose from hearths, promising suppers of fish, bread, and whatever else could be gathered affordably that day. In courtyards, families gathered around meals. Stories of the day were shared, laughter echoed, and tired bodies finally rested. While the library loomed silently nearby, it was these small moments bread broken, songs sung, and children yawning that formed the heartbeat of Alexandria, steady and ordinary. The sunlit harbor of Alexandria wasn't just a trading hub, it was a stage. Merchants bickered, sailors shouted, and musicians strummed lutes to lure customers. Daily life around the library thrived on this chaotic rhythm. The grandeur of the city pulled people from all corners, feeding the constant hum of humanity. Street vendors were masters of theater. One might shout about all it's so fresh Zeus himself approved them, while another offered papyrus sheets with exaggerated promises of durability. Humor was currency here, and exaggeration was part of salesmanship. The library's neighborhood was alive with these voices. Among the bustle, water carriers walked with yokes across their shoulders, delivering jars to homes and shops. Their work kept the city's lifeblood flowing, especially for scholars who were too busy translating or debating to fetch their own water. Without these laborers, learning might have ground to a halt. Even the smells of Alexandria told a story. The salty sea breeze, mixed with baked bread, fried fish, and the smoky temps of incense from street altars. For some, it was invigorating. For others, like delicate scholars hunched over texts, it was a distraction from fragile parchment and ink. Children darted around the city, playing games of knucklebones and chasing hoops along the cobblestones. To them, the library was less a place of learning and more an imposing mystery. They'd glance at its towering columns and whisper exaggerated tales of wizards hiding inside. Curiosity was already alive in their play. The city's taverns offered another glimpse of daily life. Sailors swapped stories of distant lands. Philosophers argued after too much wine. And occasionally, a scholar might loosen up enough to perform a dramatic reading of Homer. Knowledge wasn't confined to the library, it spilled into laughter and drunken verse. Artists painted the walls of temples and markets, capturing gods, heroes, and daily scenes alike. These works decorated Alexandria with color, reminding citizens that beauty mattered just as much as trade or scholarship. The library's district, too, benefited from this artistic energy, giving it an air of creativity and inspiration. Public bathhouses were where people of all classes mingled. The elite discussed politics, while farmers relaxed their muscles after work. Scholars, often stiff from long hours at their desks, visited baths to loosen their shoulders. These spaces were as essential to the city's rhythm as the harbor or market square. Festivals added vibrant layers to life around the library. Processions honoring the gods filled the streets with music, dancers, and sacrifices. Even serious scholars couldn't resist peeking outside when the parades passed. It was hard to stay buried in scrolls when trumpets blared and acrobats stumbled by. Theaters near the library offered another outlet for Alexandria's citizens. Plays, whether tragic or comedic, gave people a break from daily burdens. Imagine a scholar slipping away from a frustrating translation of Babylonian tablets to laugh at a farce about greedy merchants. Entertainment fed the city's soul as much as scrolls did. Citizens often gathered in the open squares, where philosophers performed debates like stage actors. These spectacles blurred the line between education and performance. Ordinary workers, who might never step into the library, could still absorb bits of wisdom while chewing roasted chickpeas from a nearby vendor. Women's roles in Alexandria were complex. While many managed households, others played active roles in commerce and religion. Priestesses performed rituals, midwives offered medical knowledge, and merchants haggled with men in the markets. Their presence shaped the daily life around the library, even if their names weren't etched into history. The diversity of Alexandria stood out. Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Persians, and traders from India and beyond mingled daily. The library sat at the heart of this melting pot, reflecting the city's cosmopolitan spirit. Each culture brought its own foods, languages, and stories, enriching the daily rhythm. Street musicians were part of that rhythm. Flutes, drums, and lyres filled the air as performers moved between stalls. Sometimes, their music found its way into scholarly work, with philosophers noting rhythms in mathematical terms. For others, it was simply background noise for shopping or gossiping. Gossip itself was a pastime. Citizens traded stories about the latest ship arrivals, political disputes, or rumors about the scholars themselves. Did you hear? A man claims he translated the stars into a map of the future. Whether true or not, such tales gave flavor to ordinary days. Money changers clinked coins in stalls, serving merchants and travelers alike. Currency from every corner of the known world passed through their hands, proof of Alexandria's role as a global hub. Around the library, These exchanges were daily reminders that knowledge and wealth often traveled side by side. Hungry citizens had countless choices. Stalls sold honey cakes, dried figs, roasted meats, or hearty stews. Workers on breaks from construction or harbor jobs lined up for quick meals, while scholars occasionally joined them, needing nourishment after long debates. The clamor of eating was as constant as the sea breeze. Craftsmen shaped clay, hammered metal, and carved wood, their shops echoing with the ring of tools. Scrolls were precious, but so were the bowls, sandals, and statues that sustained daily life. These artisans gave Alexandria a heartbeat, their work surrounding the library like a protective shell of practical beauty. Religion was ever present. Shrines to Isis, Serapis, and other deities dotted the city. Citizens stopped to pray, offer flowers, or light candles. Around the library, the gods seemed close at hand, as though watching over the pursuit of knowledge. Belief and learning intertwined in daily practice. Education wasn't limited to the library's scholars. Wealthy families hired tutors to teach their children reading, arithmetic, and rhetoric. Even in homes near the library, lessons echoed through courtyards. For poorer citizens, knowledge came from listening at debates, in theaters, or in market conversations. Alexandria's streets were classrooms in their own right. The docks provided constant energy. Workers loaded and unloaded cargo. Sailors sang rhythmic chants, and merchants haggled fiercely over prices. Each ship that arrived brought not only goods, but potential scrolls for the library. The citizens lived in anticipation of the unknown treasures that might dock tomorrow. Medical practices also played a role in daily life. Healers used herbs, poultices, and sometimes rather questionable methods. Citizens sought them out for everything from fevers to snake bites. Scholars, curious as always, often studied these remedies, testing whether tradition aligned with written knowledge stored in the library's scrolls. Law and order mattered in a bustling city. Guards patrolled the streets, keeping an eye on disputes, theft, or drunken brawls. Their presence around the library ensured that valuable scrolls and scholars remained protected, though some citizens joked that guards were more likely to nap than stop a thief. Seasonal changes shaped routines. In summer, citizens rose early to avoid the heat, while evenings buzzed with activity under oil lamps. Winter brought cooler winds, but also storms at sea, disrupting trade. Around the library, life adapted to these rhythms. Scholars wrapping themselves in cloaks, while scribes shivered at their desks. Scribes, the unsung heroes, toiled daily, copying scrolls by hand, demanded patience and precision. Their cramped writing benches filled with ink-stained fingers, muttered complaints, and occasional jokes about their worsening eyesight. Yet without them, the library's knowledge wouldn't have survived even a day. Their grind fueled the scholar's brilliance. Pets added small joys. Cats, revered in Egypt, prowled the streets and even the library halls, keeping rodents away from precious scrolls. Dogs barked in courtyards, while birds sang in cages outside windows. These animals were silent companions to citizens, softening the edges of a bustling, sometimes overwhelming city. Evening descended with a slower pace. Oil lamps lit doorways, and families gathered for meals of bread, olives, and lentils. Storytellers entertained neighbors with myths, while the harbor settled into a quieter hum. Around the library, torches flickered, hinting at scholars who refused to sleep while questions remained unanswered. In the quieter hours of night, Alexandria seemed almost magical. The waves lapped softly, the stars shimmered overhead, and the great library loomed like a guardian of secrets. Citizens slept, but the city itself never fully rested. Knowledge was alive, woven into the fabric of daily existence. Daily life around the Library of Alexandria was not extraordinary because of grand spectacles alone. It was extraordinary because it was human, filled with laughter, labor, struggle, and wonder. The library was not separate from this life, but deeply entwined, breathing the same air as the citizens who lived in its shadow. When we think about the Library of Alexandria, we often imagine not just what was inside, but also what may have slipped from history's grasp. The thought of entire lifetimes of wisdom simply gone leaves a haunting silence that whispers across the centuries. Some say the scrolls may have contained medical knowledge far beyond their time. Imagine physicians of the ancient world, writing down remedies, surgeries, or even hints of germ theory long before microscopes existed. If those texts were lost, then so were untold lives that might have been saved. Astronomy was another subject that likely filled those shelves. Observations of the stars, detailed calendars, and theories of planetary motion could have existed centuries before Europe rediscovered them. Perhaps someone had already guessed at the shape of the Earth or the movement of the planets. Mathematics, too, must have been part of the collection. Geometry from Greece, numbers from Babylon, and calculations from India may have been gathered together. What if formulas we use today were once written there, waiting only to be turned to ash? Philosophy certainly would have been preserved. Great debates about the nature of the soul, ethics, and existence itself may have been stored in careful ink. Some of these voices are unknown to us now, perhaps as deep and stirring as Plato or Aristotle. Engineering could have been one of the most practical treasures within. Schematics of machines, water systems, or weapons may have rested in those scrolls. Ancient inventors may have solved problems that were not rediscovered until the modern age. Historians of other lands might also have had their words gathered in Alexandria. Accounts of distant kingdoms, cultures, and traditions could have offered a picture of the ancient world far richer than what remains. Entire peoples might only be known through these missing pages. Medicine especially stands out as the most haunting loss. Even Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, was just one voice. Others may have written cures for common illnesses, treatments for infections, or safer ways of healing wounds. It is not far-fetched to imagine that the scrolls contained early insights into the human body. Anatomy, childbirth, or the effects of herbs and minerals might have been detailed. Such knowledge could have changed the course of healthcare forever. Some stories suggest that the scrolls included works on machines that harnessed steam or wind. If true, then centuries of technological advancement may have been delayed, waiting to be rediscovered by later minds. The idea that the Industrial Revolution might have come earlier, powered by lost Alexandrian knowledge, is both exciting and sobering. One wonders how different the world might look if steam engines had puffed smoke in Roman streets. The realm of mathematics might have been equally profound. Zero, algebra, or even early calculus could have been there. Imagine Rome or Greece working with numbers that Europe only embraced 1,000 years later. Astronomy could have been another jewel. Ancient Egyptian and Babylonian star records, combined with Greek observations, may have revealed planetary patterns long before Galileo or Copernicus. The stars themselves might have guided ships more precisely. Even geography might have been advanced within those walls. Accurate maps of Africa, Asia, or the distant Atlantic may have rested in rolled papyrus. Some legends suggest sailors may have already known of Far Off lands. The thought of literature also lingers. Poems, epics, and stories from cultures now gone may have been copied into the library. Entire mythologies could have been preserved, giving us voices we will never hear. Religious texts may also have been among the scrolls. Records of beliefs, rituals, and prayers from forgotten temples might have offered a fuller picture of the spiritual lives of the ancients. Political writings may also have been lost laws, debates, and speeches that guided nations. These could have provided insight into how empires rose and fell, offering lessons still relevant today. The sciences might have had their place as well. Natural history, descriptions of plants, animals, and minerals may have filled scroll after scroll. This would have been invaluable for agriculture, medicine, and exploration. The loss feels especially heavy when we think of how fragile papyrus was. Each scroll could contain a lifetime of observation. To lose it was not just to lose words, but the very essence of a human being's work. Perhaps even music was part of the library's riches. Notes, scales, and instruments may have been recorded. We might have had a clearer sense of how ancient music sounded, connecting us directly to voices from thousands of years ago. Some whisper that even early mechanical designs, clocks, pumps, and cranes were there. These may not be legends at all, but the seeds of engineering that bloomed centuries later in faraway lands. We also must consider the possibility of lost histories. Civilizations unknown to us may have been described in those scrolls. Old peoples, whose cities are now dust, could have lived again through words. Even agriculture may have been improved by these texts. Notes on crop rotation, soil care, or irrigation techniques might have been centuries ahead. Famine and hardship could have been lessened if such wisdom survived. Skeptics argue that perhaps much of what was lost would not have been groundbreaking, yet the sheer scale of the library suggests that even fragments of advanced ideas could have sparked revolutions. The truth is that we will never know, and perhaps that mystery itself is part of the legacy. It keeps us searching, wondering, and striving to protect the knowledge we do have. The silence left by Alexandria is louder than words. It reminds us that knowledge is fragile, that once lost it cannot always be regained. The library's ashes are not only of papyrus, but of human potential. Still, even in imagining what might have been, we honor it. To think of lost cures, vanished stories, or forgotten machines is to remember that human imagination has always reached further than we can hold. The legacy of that loss is not despair, but a deeper drive to preserve, protect, and value knowledge today. Each book on our shelves carries with it the echo of Alexandria, and the warning of what it means to lose it. Some imagine that lost texts describe the healing properties of plants, now forgotten. Remedies for fevers, herbs for pain, or tonics for the mind might once have been common knowledge before being swept away by fire and time. Others believe surgical techniques may have been written down, simple ways of cleaning wounds, stopping bleeding, or setting broken bones might have spared countless lives if only those scrolls had survived. The idea that medicine could have been centuries ahead is not far-fetched. Ancient scholars were careful observers. They might have noticed patterns of illness and healing that modern science only rediscovered much later. Some even dreamed that insights into diseases like smallpox or malaria could have been hidden in Alexandria. Perhaps an herbal treatment or method of prevention was once recorded, then lost forever. Astronomy, too, leaves us wondering. If early observers charted the stars for centuries, their combined knowledge might have revealed patterns invisible to a single culture. Entire constellations may have held forgotten meanings. It is possible that some astronomer suspected the vastness of space long before telescopes. Their writings might have contained hints that the universe was far larger than the sky above suggested. The mathematics tied to those observations may also have been profound. Calculations of distances, measurements of planetary movement, or even early geometry of space could have been preserved. Had these ideas survived, navigation at sea might have advanced earlier. Sailors could have crossed oceans with more confidence, perhaps reaching distant shores long before history records. Geography, tied to travel, may have been among the library's strongest treasures. Maps drawn by explorers might have shown coastlines and rivers now altered by time, yet invaluable for understanding the ancient world. Some claim whispers of texts describing lands beyond the known world. If such records existed, they would have reshaped how humanity viewed its place on the globe. Equally fascinating is the thought of lost philosophies. Arguments about justice, happiness, or the nature of reality may have been preserved there, giving us voices as sharp as Socrates or as tender as poets. Such voices could have influenced entire civilizations. A single idea preserved at the right time can change how societies govern, how they treat one another, and how they pursue meaning. The loss also extends to literature. Imagine comedies, tragedies, and stories from cultures now erased. These works might have delighted audiences for generations, weaving humor and humanity across borders. Some scholars wonder if whole traditions of storytelling vanished. Epics that rival Homer or plays that matched Euripides might have been buried in the silence of that ash. Even music may have been scored in symbols long before modern notation. Without them, we can only guess how ancient songs truly sounded when played in crowded streets or sacred halls. Artistic techniques could have been recorded too. Instructions for painting, sculpture, or architecture may have guided hands centuries before those skills re-emerged during the Renaissance. Engineering is perhaps one of the most tantalizing what-ifs. Designs for cranes, pumps, or watermills may have been drawn in neat lines, waiting for rediscovery. Some even speculate that mechanical marvels like simple engines or early automata were described. If true, history might have seen machines walking or turning gears long before the Middle Ages. Agriculture is another quiet but powerful candidate. Farmers may have written on irrigation, soil rotation, or even plant breeding. These small advances could have saved countless harvests. The possibility of agricultural wisdom being lost reminds us that civilization itself depends on food. One forgotten scroll may have meant the difference between feast and famine for generations. Political ideas may have been shelved there as well. Perhaps forgotten thinkers argued for rights, representation, or systems of justice, centuries before such concepts became popular. The idea that democracy or fairness might have been championed in voices we never heard adds a bittersweet note. Wisdom may not just have been delayed, but silenced entirely. Religious and spiritual texts could have filled shelves too. These might have provided bridges between faiths, showing common roots and easing conflicts born of misunderstanding. Instead, much of that harmony was left unwritten, lost before it could soften the divisions of later centuries. Histories of vanished kingdoms might have also been rolled tightly in papyrus. Chronicles of rulers, wars, and daily life could have preserved stories now erased by dust. If true, then entire civilizations may remain unknown to us, existing only as faint traces in soil, with their voices trapped in scrolls long gone. Natural science was likely another field. Descriptions of minerals, plants, and animals may have filled shelves, offering careful notes on the world as it was seen. Each observation lost meant a piece of the ancient puzzle missing, leaving us to rediscover what had once been carefully noted and filed away. And so, as we sit and imagine the library, we realize its greatest legacy may be the mystery itself. The silence of what was lost keeps us wondering, searching, and protecting what we have today. The Library of Alexandria is one of those places that feels more like a dream than a real location. It is said to have stood shining by the sea, its halls echoing with the whispers of 1,000 minds. Yet what we know of it is tangled in myth, half-truth, and the soft blur of time. Some stories tell us that it was founded by Alexander the Great himself, though history insists it came later under the rule of the Ptolemies. Still, the idea of Alexander planting the seed of knowledge fits the grandeur of his legend. After all, conquerors love leaving behind more than statues. Others say that within the library, scholars spoke in every language of the known world. It was a place where words met across Bordusa Tower of Babel made peaceful, if only for a time. Some tales even claim the library held all the knowledge of the ancient world, that every ship arriving in Alexandria was required to surrender its scrolls for copying. Imagine being a sailor, only to have customs seize your cargo of philosophy. The myths don't stop there. It is said that the library had secret chambers underground, places where forbidden knowledge was kept, texts on magic, alchemy, or divine mysteries, locked away from common eyes. A few say that those chambers still exist, buried beneath modern Alexandria, their contents untouched. Treasure hunters have searched for centuries, but the sands keep their secrets well. Other legends tell of scrolls that could change reality books, so powerful they had to be hidden. Of course, these are stories told by firesides, not classrooms, but they linger because they hint at a truth. Knowledge always feels a little like magic. Some Roman writers claimed the library's collection was so vast, it was divided into multiple buildings. The main library stood near the royal palace, while another called the daughter library was attached to the Serapeum, a temple devoted to the gods. It said that the daughter library held copies of the original works, a kind of ancient backup system. Even in those times, humans knew how easily fire and time could erase what they loved. Some myths insist that a few scrolls escaped destruction, smuggled away by fleeing scholars or hidden in desert caves. These stories are tempting because they promise that perhaps, somewhere, a fragment still survives. There's also a legend that says when the library burned, the fire raged for 6 months. This seems unlikely, but as far as legends go, it captures the drama of loss. People imagine flames licking the sky, and the smell of ink and papyrus hanging like incense. One story claims Julius Caesar himself started that fire during his siege of the city. Another says it was later destroyed under Christian or Muslim rule. Myths often grow where records vanish, and here they grow wild. The confusion of blame has become part of the myth. It's as if humanity cannot agree on who killed its greatest symbol of wisdom, because the real answer feels too heavy to bear. Some tell that Cleopatra mourned its loss deeply, seeing it as her connection to the past. Others imagined her reading within its marble halls, a queen surrounded by the ghosts of Greek philosophers. Romantic artists later painted her that way, leaning on scrolls, bathed in soft light, gazing out at the harbor as ships arrived with new knowledge. Even if it never happened, it feels right somehow. There are also whispers that the library wasn't destroyed all at once, but faded over time, burned in parts, neglected in others. Like a candle left to die slowly, its light dimmed century by century. That gradual loss feels almost more tragic than sudden destruction. To imagine scrolls simply routing, shelves gathering dust, and scholars dwindling in number is a quiet heartbreak. Myths have also grown around the scholars themselves. Some believe they practiced early forms of alchemy, or studied forbidden sciences. To later generations, this turned them into something between philosophers and magicians. A few tales even claim the scholars tried to record the voice of the gods. They sought knowledge, not meant for mortals. These stories show how the line between wisdom and hubris always blurs in legend. Others imagine the library as a kind of spiritual place, a temple where learning itself was worshipped. To walk its halls was to approach something divine, where each scroll was a sacred relic. Some poets have described the library as a city of whispers, where every breath stirred 1,000 thoughts. That image, though fanciful, captures the reverence people feel when thinking of it. Even the gods of knowledge were said to favor it. Thoth of Egypt and Athena of Greece were imagined as its patrons, watching over scribes as they copied fragile words into immortality. Some legends go further, saying that one of the scrolls contained a prophecy about the library's foe, that knowledge itself would one day be reborn in a new form. A poetic prediction, if not a literal one. There's also the tale of the Book of Fire, supposedly a scroll describing the power that would one day destroy the very library that held it. The story feels too neat, but legends love irony. Modern myths have taken shape too. Some say that every modern library is haunted by the spirit of Alexandria, that whenever a book goes missing, it's simply returning home. Another says that the burning of the library never truly endeth. Every time knowledge is lost, censored, or forgotten, the fire burns again, unseen but eternal. Writers and filmmakers still borrow its legend, turning it into a symbol of mystery, tragedy, and hope. In a way, every retelling rebuilds it word by word, story by story. Perhaps that is why the myth refuses to die. It keeps reinventing itself, just as knowledge does. The library's physical walls may have fallen, but its legend has become unbreakable. And somewhere between fact and fiction, we still find ourselves walking those marble halls in our minds, hearing the faint rustle of pages that no longer exist, yet somehow still echo. Some say the Library of Alexandria was not merely a collection of scrolls, but a living mind. Each scholar, each philosopher, each scrap of papyrus formed the neurons of something greater. A city that thought, a building that dreamed. In this version, the fire that destroyed it was like a wound to the world's consciousness, a fever that made humanity forget what it once knew. The myths say that ever since, mankind has been trying to remember. There's a story told among mystics that the library's knowledge was not lost, only transformed. They say it became the stars themselves teeny, burning symbols scattered across the night sky, waiting to be read again. Another tale claims that the scrolls turned into birds when the flames began. They flew out to every corner of the earth, carrying bits of wisdom in their wings. Where they landed, new civilizations rose. A gentler myth says that the library was never destroyed at all. It simply sank beneath the waves, swallowed by the Mediterranean. Some divers claim to hear whispers when they swim near the old harbor, like ink dissolving into water. There's even talk of a mirror library, existing in a parallel world. In dreams, a few say they've walked its corridors, guided by candlelight, reading books that glow softly like memory itself. To those who believe in reincarnation, the scholars of Alexandria live on. Every writer, teacher, and curious soul is said to carry a spark of them, a tiny ember from that great fire. Some mystics speak of the echo of Alexandria, a mysterious hum that can be heard in moments of deep study or meditation. It is said to be the resonance of that ancient knowledge, still vibrating across time. Poets have turned that hum into a metaphor for inspiration. When an idea arrives suddenly, clear and whole, it is said to be the voice of Alexandria whispering again. There are also darker myths. Some say the library held knowledge too dangerous to survive spells that could command the heavens, words that could unmake the world. The fire, in this story, was no accident, but a necessary cleansing. Others tell that a single forbidden text was hidden deep beneath its foundation. It was Kahid, the book that ends books, a scroll that contained the final truth. No one knows what it said, only that it should never be read. Some claim that book still exists, buried far below the city, protected by traps and curses. Yet, like many ancient legends, the truth may be simpler. People feared what they couldn't understand. There's a tender story tooth that one librarian, realizing what was about to happen, memorized as many scrolls as possible. When the flames consumed the rest, she walked into the desert, carrying all she could in her mind. She is said to have wandered for years, reciting words to herself so they would not be lost. Some call her the first storyteller, the mother of oral tradition. Her legend has no ending. Some say she still walks beneath the stars, whispering ancient knowledge to those who listen in dreams. In medieval times, scholars and travelers claim to find fragments of Alexandria's scrolls in faraway Lanzian temples, monasteries, even caves. These discoveries kept the myth alive, even when proven false. Each new claim reignited hope that something might have survived. The idea that not all wisdom is lost has always comforted humankind. Some myths turn the story into a lesson about pride. They say the library fell because humanity tried to become gods, and the fire was a warning against limitless curiosity. Others flip that lesson, saying it was not curiosity, but fear that destroyed it, the fear of knowledge itself. Both readings feel true, in their own way. As centuries passed, the myth evolved. Artists began to imagine the library as a symbol of paradise lost to heaven for thinkers, destroyed by ignorance. To them, rebuilding the library meant rebuilding the soul of humanity. Every new book, every classroom, every quiet study became a small act of resurrection. Some modern myths even link the internet to Alexandria, saying it is the library reborn in digital form, endless, vast, fragile, and sometimes chaotic. It's a comforting idea that after thousands of years, the great library is returned, not as marble halls, but as pixels and code, a new fire, this time of light. Others take a more mystical view. They say that when the last copy of every lost scroll is finally rewritten, the spirit of Alexandria will awaken once more. In that moment, knowledge will reunite with itself, and the world will remember all that it forgot. A quiet prophecy, made not of stone or flame, but of patience. Even skeptics find something beautiful in the myth. Whether or not it existed exactly as told, the idea of a place devoted entirely to understanding still stirs something gentle in the heart. Perhaps that's why the story endures. It reminds us that knowledge, like love, cannot truly be burned. It can hide, it can scatter, but it always finds its way back. And so, when we open a book or search for truth, we are, whether we realize it or not, stepping once more into the library's shadow. Its doors may be invisible, its shelves unseen, but the Library of Alexandria still stands, quietly, inside every curious mind. What if the flames never came? What if, by some twist of fate, the Library of Alexandria had survived? It's a question that feels both impossible and irresistible, a door to a world we'll never see, but one we can still imagine. Picture it. Marble walls gleaming in the Egyptian sun, scrolls stacked higher than ladders, the scent of ink and parchment drifting through the air. Scholars wander through colonnades, trading theories instead of gold. In this alternate history, the world didn't lose its greatest treasure. It kept growing, learning, and dreaming century after century. Humanity's curiosity was never interrupted by fire. Instead of forgetting, we remembered everything. The wisdom of Egypt, Greece, India, and Persia flowed together like rivers meeting the sea. The library became not just a place, but a civilization's beating heart. Imagine walking its halls in the year 100 AD and finding machines powered by water and sunlight, philosophers debating not about the shape of the earth, but how to reach the stars. In this version of reality, progress came early. Medicine advanced centuries ahead of schedule. Diseases that once shaped empires might have vanished before they began. Astronomy, too, might have reached beyond imagination. Perhaps we'd have mapped the solar system while Rome still stood. Sailors could navigate by instruments guided by Alexandria's charts. The Renaissance might not have needed to rebirth knowledge because it never died. Art, science, and philosophy would have continued in one unbroken line. And with that, perhaps, the Dark Ages would never have cast their long shadow. There would still be wars and politics. Humans will be humans, but the light of learning would never fade. Think of languages that would have survived, ancient tongues still sung aloud, preserved because scribes never stopped copying. We might even speak a little Alexandrian today. The world map could look different too. With faster discoveries, trade routes might have stretched across oceans long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. Perhaps the library's scholars would have built devices we only now recognize: clocks, lenses, early engines. Maybe they'd laugh at how long it took us to invent the telescope. And somewhere in a quiet corner, an astronomer might have scribbled, "One day, mankind will walk among the stars," and the others would have nodded, thinking, well, of course, in philosophy, the unity of thought from every culture could have shaped a world less divided. If wisdom flowed freely, perhaps religion and reason would have grown side by side, not as rivals but as partners. Imagine the arts, music, written in mathematical harmony, sculptures that merged Egyptian grace with Greek realism, and plays that explored both myth and science. Alexandria could have been the capital of creativity, a place where poets quoted mathematicians, and mathematicians wrote poetry about stars. And while Europe slept through its medieval winters, Alexandria's light might have guided travelers across continents, preserving the pulse of ancient curiosity. By the time our modern age arrived, humanity might have already colonized the moon, or at least sent polite letters there. The library would have stood as proof that knowledge is the true treasure of civilizations, not gold, not conquest, but understanding. Even today, that idea would ripple through every school, every scholar, every curious child. Learning wouldn't be something forced, it would be a sacred inheritance. The idea of genius might look different too. Instead of rare prodigies, the world would be full of ordinary brilliance, nurtured by centuries of shared wisdom. Some say knowledge makes people arrogant, but maybe, with 1,000 years of perspective, we'd learn that wisdom actually makes you humble. The library's preservation might also have changed our relationship with nature. Ancient texts on ecology, agriculture, and balance could have helped us avoid many of the mistakes we were facing now. Imagine if humanity never lost track of harmony, of progress and preservation walked hand in hand, guided by ancient lessons. There's a soft humor in thinking that somewhere in that library, a philosopher might have already written about climate change, and we just forgot. Even religion might have evolved differently. With so much ancient philosophy preserved, perhaps faith and science would have blended into something wiser, something calmer. In such a world, there might be fewer wars fought over differences, and more discussions under candlelight about meaning. Alexandria, the eternal city of thought, would have been our North Star, reminding us that enlightenment isn't a destination but a lifelong habit. And maybe, just maybe, in this world that never lost its library, we'd be a little kinder, a little more curious, and a lot more patient with mystery. If the library had endured, education itself might have looked different. Not a privilege for the few, but a birthright for everyone. Learning could have been woven into daily life like bread and salt. Imagine small schools sprouting from the library's example, miniature centers of curiosity scattered from Egypt to Spain, to India and beyond. The idea of childhood might have shifted to, instead of sending children to work early, societies might have seen their minds as treasures to cultivate. Printing might have arrived centuries earlier. The world's first printing press could have clattered not in Germany, but in the echoing halls of Alexandria. With each scroll Copedain shared, the hunger for knowledge would have spread like wildfire, but this time a gentler one. You could walk through markets where merchants sold spices beside scrolls of geometry, or doctors trading herbal recipes copied from the library's texts. Even the architecture of the world might have been shaped by it. Cities built not just for defense, but for discussion, for light, air, and thought. The famous lighthouse, the Pharos, might have stood beside the library as twin beacons, one guiding sailors through darkness, the other guiding minds. And perhaps Alexandria would have grown into something resembling our modern internet, a network of scrolls, scholars, and shared wonder. It's strange to think about what the library might have meant to those who never saw it. Maybe distant civilizations would have sent emissaries just to study for a season. A Chinese astronomer learning Greek trigonometry. A Persian poet studying Egyptian medicine, all under the same vaulted ceiling. In such a world, knowledge wouldn't belong to one empire, but to everyone. The phrase, lost knowledge, would never exist. History itself might feel less fragmented. Instead of rediscovering truths every few centuries, we'd have built upon them continuously, layer by layer. Wars might still have raged, but perhaps even conquerors would hesitate before burning wisdom. The idea of destroying knowledge could have been unthinkable. The modern world might have emerged with a far gentler rhythm technology blooming under the care of philosophy and ethics. Machines could have been designed not just to work, but to harmonize with human life. Tools for balance, not dominance. Imagine if humanity had learned early on that progress is best when paired with reflection. The world could have had its revolutions not of blood, but of thought. Quiet uprisings of curiosity, peaceful protests, led by poets and mathematicians. By the Renaissance, Alexandria might have been the center of an unbroken lineage of thinkers stretching 2,000 years. We might have known the true words of Aristotle, the real maps of ancient explorers, the forgotten formulas that could still change our world today. Our sense of time might feel different, too. Without the gaps, without the dark ages, we might see history as one long, gentle sunrise. Imagine standing in that sunlight holding a scroll written by hands that lived 1,000 years before you, their ink still whispering. And maybe, in that imagined world, people wouldn't rush to know everything. They'd take comfort in curiosity itself, letting mystery live beside knowledge. Even the library scholars would probably chuckle at us now, our screens glowing, our data vast, yet fleeting. They'd remind us that wisdom isn't stored, it's lived. The greatest miracle of that surviving library wouldn't be the inventions or the empires that inspired it, would be the culture it nurtured. A world that sees learning not as competition, but communion, where sharing an idea feels as natural as breathing. And perhaps that's the truest legacy of the Library of Alexandria, not what it held, but what it symbolized. The eternal, gentle fire of human curiosity. We might not have that fire physically anymore. The marble's gone, the scrolls are ash, but somehow the idea survived. It flickers every time someone wonders, what if, every time someone stays awake just to learn a little more. Maybe that's the real miracle. The Library of Alexandria didn't die, it transformed. It became us. And so, as the imagined doors of the library close for tonight, the light still lingers a faint, comforting glow across the ages. If this story stirred your curiosity, maybe that's proof the library never truly burned. It's in every question we ask, every quiet moment of wonder.